Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to be doing a couple of practice problems, extra practice related to central banks and monetary policy. So let's get started. Okay, the first question gives us a balance sheet, and it says Central Bank or Cardinal Bank is a bank with a balance sheet that looks like this, 360, so they balance, and it looks like the bank has positive equity, so at least we know it's functioning. Banking system has limited reserves, and that's going to be key for us to keep that in mind. Calculate the required reserve ratio if the bank holds no excess reserves. Well, if we know that all of this is required, 60 over 240 is equal to 0.25, or we could say 25%. Assume the economy is below full employment. Well, what does that mean? That means a recession, right? A recession. Identify an open market operation the central bank could use to close the gap. So this is either saying buy bonds or sell bonds. If you give me any other answer, buy or sell bonds, you get it wrong. And we want to buy bonds to make the money supply bigger. Supply of money bigger. And assume they buy it. Buys $30,000 of bonds from Cardinal Bank. What's the dollar value of the change in monetary base explained with numbers? We're going to say it's going to increase by 30,000, right? 30,000 because new excess reserves were created. It literally created $30,000 of new excess reserves. So we would say that bank reserves went up. Calculate the maximum change in money supply as a result of the central bank purchase. After all adjustments take place, show your work. Well, the initial that they could loan would be, well, 30,000. They could loan all of it out. The money multiplier is 1 over 0.25, right? So our money multiplier is 1 over 0.25. So times our money multiplier of 4 gives us 120,000 increase. Based solely on the change in the money supply, will real output increase, decrease, or stay the same in the short run? Explain. Well, we would say that it will increase because the supply of money increased, therefore interest rates went down, therefore aggregate demand went up, and therefore output goes up, which is really just repeating that same thing right there. So it's really just saying supply of money going up makes it cheaper to borrow, which is going to increase spending in the economy, and thus output would rise. Now, in the long run, that's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. Now, this part here, I'm going to explain, but I don't think that this is really something that we need to know for this unit. So this is a Unit 9 preview, right? Unit 9 preview, not on the exam. And so it's not on this exam, to be clear, not on this exam. But the short answer would be is that output would not change, or we could say it could increase in the long run. And there are two different possible outcomes that could actually happen here. And I know that some of you are going to say, wait a minute, what's going on with that? But like, there are actually two. One would be that the higher levels of aggregate demand is actually going to cause more demand for money. And that's going to cause essentially there to be higher interest rates, and it would push that interest rate right back to where it came from. So one level of this would say the output's really not going to change in the long run because the higher prices that result from aggregate demand going up means more people are going to need money to do stuff. And the greater demand for money will push interest rates right back up to where we started. The other explanation is that if the interest rates are pushed down, then that could cause there to be more investment spending, more capital, more productivity, and in the long run, faster economic growth. So you could actually have two completely different answers with very different explanations for that particular problem. We're going to come back in Unit 9 and look at it. Number 2, the central bank buys 5,000 of bonds in the open market from Brian. That's a weird thing. They don't normally buy them from Brian, who deposits the proceeds into his checking account at Greyhound Bank. The banking system has limited reserves. The required ratio is 20%. Calculate the change in required reserves for Greyhound Bank. Well, he deposited them into his checking account, and so it's subject to 20%. So 20% of 5K equals $2,000. Why did I? No, $1,000. I don't know why I just said that. I think I was thinking of the other kind. 1,000. There we go. Dollar value of the maximum amount of new loans they could initially make. Well, that's 80% of the 5K, which is $4,000. right? Based on the central bank's open market purchase of bonds, calculate the maximum amount of money supply could change. Well, the $4,000, right, is here, right? And we'd say that. But we know that the money multiplier is 1 over 0.2, so 20,000. I really don't necessarily care for this question. This is an AP exam problem from a few years ago. And part of the reason I don't like this is that it's really saying open market buying of bonds, that would have created the $5,000 because that actually does exist. But it tells you that he deposits them into his checking account and then the reserve ratio kicks in at 20%. So I'm not a huge fan of this question. Not a fan. I'm going to literally write that on here. Gloss is not a fan of this one, of this question. And it's really because of the way this question is set up. So I think in future years, I'm probably going to change it. How will the change in the money supply affect aggregate demand of the price level in the short run? Well, this we can answer that it will increase aggregate demand and increase price levels because the supply of money went up and therefore interest rates went down. And that's really what's causing it to rise, is that consumption and investment spending would be going up. And that's the explanation for that, is that we would say more consumption, more investment, more aggregate demand, and more price levels. Let's take a look at these multiple choice, see which ones of these I'm not a fan of. Number one, if a central bank increases administered interest rates, it is most likely responding to which of the following? If it's increasing administered interest rates, it's trying to slow the economy down. It's probably responding to prices that are too high. So we're going to say rising price levels. Number two, in a country whose banking system has limited reserves, which of the following actions increases the money supply? So increases the money supply. So we have three things that it could be: lower the reserve ratio, lower the discount rate, or buy bonds. And the first one here, buying government bonds on the open market, is our correct answer, A. Number three, assuming a banking system with limited reserves, which of the following actions reduces the ability of the banking system to create money? In other words, the money supply gets smaller. Well, that would be the opposite of what we just said here. So we would say maybe, what do we got? Increasing the reserve requirement. That's going to make that money supply get smaller. Number four, the shift in AD from 1 to 2, which is going that way if you can't really see it, could have been caused by what? Well, lower taxes, no, that's not going to do it. Decrease in the money supply, that would do it. And that's because the interest rate would go up and therefore consumption and investment would go down. For number five, if an ample reserves banking system, what action taken by the central bank would cause a decrease in the cyclical rate of unemployment? So decreasing unemployment, which means that output went up, right? So what would cause aggregate demand to go up? Well, if we're talking about an ample reserves banking system, that would be the interest rates going down. And interest rates going down could be caused by a decrease in interest on reserves. It's basically saying lower the administered interest rates, administered rates, right? Lower those interest rates. And if they lowered decrease the administered interest rates, it's going to decrease interest, push aggregate demand up, and lower unemployment. This is a really, really tough question. Number six, which actually describes the federal funds rate? It's the interest rate that banks charge each other for overnight loans. We call it the policy rate, aka the policy rate. Policy rate. And so we would say B for that one. Seven, if the interest rate on short-term bonds declined as a result of policy action. So if the interest rate went down, if interest rate decreases, they must have done what? So how did we get the interest rate to go down? Decreased its administered interest rates. That would work. Yeah, they must have decreased the administered interest rates. And let's take a look here. 8, which of the following is a monetary policy that can be used to counteract a recession? So we're saying what would be something that would make the interest rates go down? Lowering the interest paid on reserves, that would make it go down. Lowering tax rates, that's not a monetary policy, right? Not monetary. That would not work. That would not work. And that's not monetary. Okay. So this would actually make interest go up, and this would make interest go up. So A is the correct answer here. Number 9, assume a country's banking system has limited reserves, that the reserve requirement is 10%. The central bank sells 10,000 in bonds in the open market. Then that 10,000 times 1 over 0.1, which is just 10. So 10 times 10 is equal to a 100,000 change. And if they're selling, sell smaller, right? The money supply gets smaller. And so we would say decrease by a maximum of $100,000. Number 10, which of the following will most likely result in an increase in aggregate demand? So that's going to be something that makes interest go down. An increase in the interest rates, no, that's not going to do it. Disruption in global oil, no, that's going to affect SRAS. We know that. We know better than that. A decrease in the central bank's administered interest rates, that's going to do it for us. C is the correct answer. Number 11, the Mexican current domestic output is lower than its potential, so we are in a recession. Right? So first thing I can observe, we're in a recession. Assume the bank now decreases administered interest rates. Good idea. What will be the short-run effects of the bank's action on cyclical unemployment and real income? So we would expect that unemployment will go down and output will go up. And this real income is equivalent to output because it's one person's spending is another person's income. So cyclical unemployment will decrease and real income will increase. E is the correct answer. So hopefully this helped you. Some of these are pretty challenging questions. I'll see you next time.